The night the rain broke the city, Amara Okoye was not thinking about storms. She was thinking about names. If it was a girl, she would name her Somtoshuku, which means join me in praising God. If it was a boy, Chinedu, her husband, wanted Obina, which means father's heart. She had whispered those names into the dark more times than she could count, testing how they felt against her tongue, rolling them gently as if practicing for a future that seemed certain. That certainty was the cruelest part, because everyone had been certain. The elders had been certain. The church had been certain. Even she had been certain. When she married Chinedu Okoye, people said their union looked like destiny, and destiny in their world always came with children. Before the silence, before the waiting rooms, before the prayers that tasted like desperation, there was a conference hall filled with ambition. Amara had almost not attended the Lagos Future Leaders Summit that year. She had just been promoted at her advertising firm and was drowning in deadlines. But her best friend Kemi had insisted. "You need to network," Kemi said, "and maybe find a husband while you are at it." Amara had laughed. "I am not shopping," but she went. The hall smelled of polished wood and expensive cologne. Young professionals in tailored suits filled the seats, speaking about startups and funding rounds and the new Africa. Then he stepped on stage, Chinedu Okoye, tall, composed, not loud but commanding. He spoke about renewable energy solutions in rural communities. He spoke about dignity and infrastructure as a form of justice. It didn't sound like he was selling something. It sounded like he believed in something. Amara felt it. Not attraction at first, but recognition. When the session ended, she found herself walking towards him. "You speak like someone who isn't afraid of failure," she said. He studied her for a moment and he was intrigued. "Failure is only frightening when you don't know who you are," he responded. "And who are you?" Amara asked. "A man who wants to leave the world better than he found it." She smiled slowly and said, "That's ambitious." "No, that's hopeful," he corrected gently, and that was the beginning. Their first date was not glamorous. They sat at a small suya spot on Admiralty Way, sharing spicy skewers and bottled malt drinks. She watched him wipe pepper from his lips and thought, "This man is too intentional to be accidental." He asked about her childhood. She told him about growing up in Enugu, about her mother's strict discipline and her father's quiet humor. He also told her about being the only son after 3 daughters. "My mother calls me a crown," he said softly, "but crowns are heavy," he added. She noticed the way his voice changed when he spoke about responsibility. Their relationship unfolded like a carefully written novel. He sent her voice notes when he traveled. She wrote him handwritten letters instead of text. They prayed together, not because they were perfect Christians, but because they were trying. One night, as they sat on a balcony overlooking the city lights, he asked, "What does your future look like?" She answered without hesitation, "A home filled with laughter, children running, music playing, just peace." He nodded and responded, "Mine too." He didn't know then how deeply those words would root themselves inside him. He proposed on Takwa Bay Beach. No orchestra, no drones, just sand beneath their feet and the ocean stretching endlessly ahead. "I don't want a wedding," he said, kneeling. "I want a life with you." Her tears came before the ring did, and she said yes. Their wedding was everything an Igbo celebration should be: loud, joyful, excessive in love. Elders poured libation, aunts adjusted their gele and whispered advice. One elderly woman held her hands tightly and declared, "Your womb will not know delay." The crowd shouted, "Amen." Chinedu squeezed her fingers. Neither of them imagined how heavy that amen would become. The first year was blissful. They traveled to Accra, Zanzibar, Kigali. They made love without calculation, without apps, without charts. They bought baby clothes just for fun once, laughing at themselves in a boutique. "We are not even pregnant yet," she teased. "We are preparing by faith," he replied. Children would come when they come. They were not worried, at least not yet. The second year began subtly. At Sunday lunch, Chinedu's mother asked lightly, "Any good news?" Amara smiled and said, "Soon, mommy." She wasn't offended. She wasn't anxious. She believed in timing. By the end of the second year, her own mother began sending herbal mixtures just to strengthen the womb. Amara drank them obediently, but still nothing. By year 3, the laughter thinned. Her period became a monthly announcement of disappointment. She started tracking ovulation cycles. She downloaded apps and marked dates. Chinedu noticed all this. "We don't have to pressure it," he said gently. "I'm not pressuring," she insisted. "I'm just being proactive." Intimacy shifted. It was no longer spontaneous. It was scheduled and timed. After each attempt, she would lie still, whispering silent prayers into the darkness. Let this be the month. But it never was. They went together for their first hospital visit. The gynecologist was kind. Tests were done. Hormones were checked. Ultrasound was performed. Everything looks normal, the doctor said. Relief washed over her. Chinedu squeezed her hand. "See?" he whispered. They celebrated that night with dinner, but months passed and nothing changed. The whisper began. At a cousin's child dedication, an aunt pulled Amara aside. "You are too career-focused," the woman said bluntly. "Relax. A stressed womb cannot conceive." Amara forced a smile. At Christmas, Chinedu's uncle called him aside. "You are our only son. Legacy matters." Chinedu nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir." But that night, he lay awake long after Amara slept. Legacy, that word lingered. In his culture, being the only son was not just identity, it was duty. And duty demanded continuity. By the 4th year, the tone shifted from curiosity to concern. His mother suggested prayer houses. Her aunt recommended a prophetess. They went. White garments, incense, prophecies about ancestral blockages. Sacrifices were suggested and they complied. A pastor declared it was a spiritual test. God is preparing something big. They fasted harder, prayed louder, still nothing. At baby showers, Amara smelled through tightening lungs. She began avoiding them altogether. At night, she sometimes cried quietly in the bathroom so her husband wouldn't hear, but he heard anyway. By year 5, something unspoken settled between them. It was hostility, not resentment, just weight. He buried himself in work, expanding his company aggressively. She threw herself into projects at her firm. At dinner, conversations felt thinner. Not because they didn't love each other, but because love alone was beginning to feel insufficient against expectation. One evening, after another negative test, she said softly, "Maybe we should both do more detailed fertility tests." He paused. "I did mine years ago," he replied. "Let us repeat it," she insisted gently. For peace, he nodded. But something in his eyes flickered, a shadow. She noticed, and for the first time, a small seed of suspicion formed. The clinic was quiet, too quiet. They sat side by side, not speaking much. Tests were done, samples were collected, results would be emailed. As they drove home, the radio played softly. Neither mentioned the tension humming beneath the surface. The night Chinedu received the email, Lagos was unusually quiet. No generators coughing in the distance, no traffic horns, no loud music from neighboring compounds, just stillness. His phone vibrated softly on the dining table while Amara cleared the plates. He glanced at the subject line, "Fertility Analysis Reports. This is confidential." His throat tightened. He opened it casually at first, as if he were checking a work memo. The words stared back at him in cold medical language. Severe oligospermia, extremely low sperm counts, possible long-term condition. He blinked, he scrolled, he reread. The room felt smaller. He had expected something mild, temporary, and maybe stress-related. Not this. Not something that sounded permanent. He closed the email quickly when Amara walked back into the room. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," he replied too quickly. She paused and studied him, but said nothing. Later that night, when she slept, he opened the email again. The doctor's note at the bottom was clear. Further treatment options available, but natural conception's probability significantly reduced. Significantly reduced, the phrase echoed. He leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above him. For years, he had quietly assumed, like everyone else, that if there was a problem, it must be her. Not consciously, not cruelly, just culturally. Now the truth sat in his inbox, and it was his. The next morning, Amara asked gently, "Did the clinic send the results?" He hesitated for half a second. Not yet, he responded. The lie slid out smoothly. Too smoothly. She nodded slowly and said, okay. He went to work feeling like something had lodged inside his chest. Throughout the day, he found himself staring blankly at presentations, hearing words but not processing them. Only son, legacy, crown. His father had once told him, a man must plant trees whose shade he would never sit under. What if he could not plant anything? The thought unsettled him. By evening, he had convinced himself of something dangerous. I will tell her when I am ready. But readiness is often just fear wearing patience as a disguise. Amara felt it before she understood it. Chinedu was not distant in a dramatic way. He was distant in small ways. He lingered in the shower longer. He avoided eye contact when she mentioned the hospital. He stayed up late pretending to answer emails. One evening as they ate dinner, she asked again lightly, still no results? He shook his head. Labs are slow, she nodded, but her intuition tightened. She had spent 5 years blaming her body in silence. Something inside her refused to accept more ambiguity. Not this time. That same week, Chinedu's mother visited unexpectedly. She arrived with a basket of fruits and an air of forced cheerfulness. My children, she exclaimed, hugging them both. Over lunch, the conversation shifted, as it always did. You know, she began carefully, there is a prayer program in Enugu, very powerful. Many women have conceived after attending. Amara smiled politely. We will consider it, mommy. Chinedu remained quiet. His mother's gaze lingered on Amara a little too long. Sometimes, she continued, lowering her voice, the problem is spiritual, especially with women who are too exposed. The implication hung heavy. Amara felt it rise to her face. Too exposed, too educated, too career focused. She swallowed the response forming in her throat. Chinedu said nothing. And that silence cut deeper than the words. Later that night, she turned to him. Why didn't you say anything? He avoided her eyes. It would only create drama. She stared at him in disbelief. I have been carrying this drama alone for 5 years. He said nothing because he was carrying something too, but he had chosen not to share it. 2 weeks later, fate stopped waiting. Amara needed to print a proposal urgently. Her laptop battery had died, so she used ease. She wasn't searching, she wasn't suspicious enough to snoop. She simply clicked on documents, and there it was, a folder labeled medical. Her heart quickened. She hesitated, but then opened it. The reports loaded slowly, line by line, word for word, severe oligospermia. Her breath became shallow. She read it again before she noticed the date. It has been 2 weeks ago, so he had known. All those evenings of gentle lies, all those moments she felt blamed without accusation. The room began to spin. For 5 years, she had swallowed shame that was not hers. For 5 years, she had questioned her body, and the truth had been sitting quietly in his inbox, not shared, not confessed, but hidden. She did not scream. She did not call him immediately. She printed the reports, folded it neatly, and placed it on the dining table. Then she sat and waited. When he entered the house that evening, he knew instantly. The hair was too still, the silence too deliberate. His eyes fell on the folded paper. His shoulders dropped. You saw it. Not a question. She nodded slowly. You knew. Her voice was calm. Too calm. I was going to tell you, he said weakly. When? She asked. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. When you felt less ashamed? She pressed. His jaw tightened. In our society, she interrupted gently but firmly. A man must always be strong, I understand. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but her voice did not shake. I was carrying shame that was not mine. The words hit him like a physical blow. He sank into a chair. I was afraid you would see me differently. She looked at him for a long moment and said, I do see you differently. Then came silence. Thunder rolled outside. The storm had arrived. For days, the house felt unfamiliar. They moved around each other carefully, and at night they lay back to back, not out of hatred, but out of wounded pride. Chinedu avoided mirrors. He avoided calls from his mother. He avoided conversations about children. Masculinity had always felt effortless to him. Now it felt fragile, like glass under pressure. Amara wrestled with conflicting emotions, anger, betrayal, compassion. She understood his fear, but trust had cracked, and cracks do not disappear overnight. One evening, she spoke softly. "Do you know what hurt the most?" He looked up. "You did not trust me with the truth." His voice broke. "I didn't trust myself with it." That was the first honest sentence he had spoken since the confrontation, and something shifted slightly. As if sensing vulnerability, external pressure intensified. At a family gathering, a distant cousin pulled Chinedu aside. "Be careful," the cousin warned quietly. "Women these days, if they cannot give you children, they will block your destiny." The words made his stomach churn. He knew the irony, but he said nothing. Meanwhile, Amara overheard two aunties whispering at a wedding, "Maybe you should marry a second wife." She froze at the sound of a second wife. The suggestion wasn't even subtle anymore. It was strategic. Legacy must be preserved at all costs. That night, she confronted him again. "If your family asks you to remarry, will you do?" He stared at her, shocked. "Where is this coming from? Answer me." He took a long breath. "I married you, not your womb." The answer steadied her, but doubt still lingered, because love can be strong and still fragile under societal pressure. Eventually, they returned to the fertility clinic together. This time, no secrets. The specialist spoke plainly. There are treatment options: IVF, assisted procedures, donor alternatives. The word donor hung awkwardly in the air. Chinedu's jaw tightened. Amara squeezed his hand gently. "We will consider everything," she said calmly. Outside the clinic, he exhaled deeply. "I don't want pity," he murmured. She stopped walking. "I don't pity you." He looked at her. "I am angry, I am hurt, but I do not pity you." He nodded slowly. For the first time since the discovery, they felt like partners again. Treatment began: hormone circles, medical appointments, financial strain, emotional exhaustion. But something unexpected happened in the process. They began talking, truly talking, about ego, about fear, about how culture has shaped their silence. One night, lying in bed, Chinedu whispered, "I thought being a man meant solving problems alone." Amara turned towards him. Being a man means staying. The simplicity of it pierced him. Staying even when pride hurts, even when society whispers, even when the mirror reflects something unfamiliar. There was a moment, a brief, dangerous moment, when everything nearly collapsed. A family elder confronted Chinedu privately. "You are too calm," the elder said sternly. "If she cannot give you a child, take another wife quietly. No one will blame you." Chinedu felt something rise inside him. Not shame, not fear, but clarity. "It is not her," he said firmly. The elder frowned. "What do you mean?" Chinedu held the man's gaze. "I said it is not her." The elder's eyes widened. Understanding dawned slowly. And for the first time, Chinedu felt something shift inside him. Not weakness, not humiliation, but freedom. Truth, once spoken aloud, loses some of its power to wound. Months into treatment, hope returned cautiously. One morning, Amara stood once again in the bathroom, pregnancy test in hand. She had learned not to expect too much, but she waited. Seconds stretched. Then, a faint second line. So faint she thought she imagined it. Her knees weakened. She sat on the cold tiles, staring, not daring to celebrate. When she showed Chinedu, he stared at it silently. Then his face crumpled, not because he was certain, but because they had survived long enough to see possibility again. Whether that faint line became a child or not mattered less than what had already changed. They had confronted pride, exposed secrecy, defied expectation, redefined strength. And when months later they held their newborn daughter in their arms, it was not just a child they welcomed, it was restoration. Chinedu looked down at the tiny life wrapped in white clothes and whispered, "You are not proof of my manhood, you are proof of our courage." Amara smiled through tears. The house that once echoed with silence now echoed with soft cries and lullabies. But the great miracle had happened long before that moment. It had happened the day truth replaced ego. In many villages, elders say, a storm does not destroy the tree whose roots are deep. Their roots had been tested, bent, shaken, but not uprooted. And that is how their story became legend. Not because they had a child, but because they chose honesty when silence would have been easier. And that's where today's tale ends, but the wisdom lives on. If you felt the lesson in this story, like, comment and subscribe, and join me next time when the fire burns again for another tale.